She was 22 and had just been kicked out. No fight, just a landlord whose daughter had come home from college and needed the apartment back. And with $10 and her grandmother's timber scribe in her coat pocket, she bought a crumbling covered bridgekeeper's house at the end of a bridge over a creek in Ashtabula County, Ohio. In a stretch of northeast Ohio that had not seen a working bridgekeeper since 1971. The clapboard had gone silver. The river room floor had buckled. But what nobody knew was that sealed in the river room of that old house was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Marin Aldrich had grown up listening to wood. Not listening the way most people listen to wood, the creak of a porch, the groan of a beam in the wind. But the specific deep listening of a person who has been trained to hear the difference between sound timber and failing timber by striking it with the flat of her hand and interpreting the note it returns. A sound timber returns a sharp, clear note, dense, resonant, the sound of a thing that is whole. A failing timber returns a dull, flat thud, soft, muffled, the sound of rot working through the grain from the inside out. Her grandmother had taught her to hear that difference at the age of 6, standing on a covered bridge over a creek on a cold morning in October. And the learning had changed the way Marin heard every piece of wood for the rest of her life. Her grandmother's name was Lotta Aldrich, and she had been a covered bridge inspector for Ashtabula County, Ohio for 31 years. Lotta had not built bridges. Lotta had kept them standing. She had walked every covered bridge in the county twice a year. Once in the spring after the thaw and once in the fall before the freeze. And she had inspected every timber in every bridge by hand, climbing the trusses, tapping each member with the flat of her palm, listening to the note, marking the failing timbers with a chalk X, and writing the findings in a bridge log that she submitted to the county highway department. The county had 19 covered bridges, more covered bridges per county than anywhere else in Ohio. And Lotta had known every timber in every bridge the way a doctor knows every bone in a body. Lotta had been born in 1936 in a farmhouse on a creek road outside the town of Andover in the northeast corner of Ashtabula County. The daughter of a timber framer named Eric Aldrich, who had built barns and corn cribs and hay sheds across the county for 30 years using the mortise and tenon joinery that his German immigrant father, a man named Otto, had brought from a village near Stuttgart in 1889. Otto had been a Zimmermann, a timber framer, in Germany, and he had practiced the trade in Ohio for 42 years. And the barns he had built were still standing in Ashtabula County 100 years later, because Otto had understood that a timber joint held together by a wooden peg, and the precise fit of the mortise to the tenon, was stronger than a joint held together by nails, because a nail could rust, and a peg could not. And because a mortise cut to fit a tenon was a joint that tightened with age as the wood dried and compressed, while a nailed joint loosened with age as the nail holes enlarged. Eric had taught this understanding to Lotta, and Lotta had applied it, not to building, but to inspecting. To the specific discipline of looking at an existing timber structure and determining whether it was sound. Eric had taken Lotta to the covered bridges of Ashtabula County from the time she was a girl, and he had shown her how to read a bridge the way he read a barn by looking at the joints, tapping the timbers, checking the connections, and understanding that a structure made of wood was not a static thing, but a living thing that changed with every season. Wood swelled in the wet months and shrank in the dry months. Wood expanded in the heat and contracted in the cold. Wood absorbed the vibration of every vehicle that crossed the bridge, and the vibration traveled through the structure and found the weak points. And a weak point that was not repaired became a failure point, and a failure point in a bridge meant someone could die. Lotta had taken the inspector's job in 1962 at the age of 26 when the previous inspector, a man named Willard Foss who had held the position for 23 years, had retired. Willard had trained Lotta across 2 seasons, walking every bridge with her, showing her the critical points. The king posts, the vertical timbers that carried the weight of the roadway down to the abutments. The top cords, the horizontal timbers that ran along the top of the truss and resisted the outward thrust. The bottom cords, the timbers that carried the tension. The diagonal braces that transferred load from the roadway to the king posts, and the connections, the mortise and tenon join. TS and the iron drift pins that held everything together. The connections are where bridges fail, Willard told Lotta, not the timbers. A timber can rot for 20 years and still carry load. But a connection that fails transfers the load to the next connection, and the next connection wasn't designed for that load, and the chain reaction starts. Check the connections first, always. Lotta had told Marin about Willard, the way certain grandmothers tell lineage stories, as a way of establishing that the knowledge had been passed down hand to hand through a chain of people who had each spent decades learning what wood sounds like when it is whole, and what it sounds like when it is not. Willard had learned from a man named Krebs, who had inspected the bridges from 1916 to 1939. Krebs had learned from the builders themselves, the men who had constructed the covered bridges of Ashtabula County in the 1860s and 1870s, using white oak and hemlock and iron drift pins, and the specific engineering of the Howe truss, which distributed load through a combination of vertical iron rods and diagonal wooden braces. Lotta had inspected the county's 19 covered bridges for 31 years from 1962 until her retirement in 1993. She had walked every bridge twice a year. She had tapped every timber. She had marked every failing member. She had written 31 years of bridge logs, 62 inspections, 19 bridges per inspection, an average of 80 timbers per bridge. By Lotta's estimate, she had tapped and listened to approximately 94,000 individual timbers across her career. Lotta had told Marin stories from the bridges, the way certain grandmothers tell trade stories as instruction, as case law. She told Marin about the spring of 1978, when the March thaw had sent a surge of ice and water down the Grand River, and the Route Road Bridge had taken a direct hit from a floating log that had struck the upstream King Post with enough force to crack the tenon at the base. Lotta had been called out at dawn. She had crawled under the bridge in the floodwater and had tapped the post and heard the split. Not a dull thud but a sharp double note, the sound of a timber that was cracked but not yet separated. A cracked timber sings two notes, Lotta told Marin. A sound timber sings one. A rotting timber sings none. The crack is the one you have to catch fastest because a cracked timber can hold for a day or it can fail in a minute, and you don't know which until you hear it. The county had closed the bridge that morning and replaced the post that week, and the bridge was still standing. She told Marin about the Doyle Road Bridge, a small span over Canute Creek that had been scheduled for demolition in 1985 because the county engineer had declared it structurally deficient based on a visual inspection. Lotta had walked the bridge and tapped every timber and had found that the trusses were sound. The visual deterioration was cosmetic surface weathering, not structural rot. She had written in her bridge log, Doyle Road, trusses sound. Surface weathering only. Do not. The county had argued. Lotta had brought a load of gravel and driven it across the bridge herself to prove it could carry weight. The county had backed down. The bridge was still standing 40 years later. Lotta had also taught Marin about the specific properties of the wood in the covered bridges. The original builders had used white oak for the structural members, king posts, cords, and braces because white oak was the strongest native hardwood, and because white oak resisted rot better than any other species due to a cellular structure called tylosis which blocked moisture from penetrating the grain. The deck planks were hemlock, softer, cheaper, easier to replace, designed to be sacrificial. The deck wore out. The trusses endured. The covered roof existed for one reason, to keep the rain off the trusses. A covered bridge was not covered for the convenience of the traveler. A covered bridge was covered for the preservation of the oak. Lotta had married a man named Walter Aldrich, a cousin, a machinist at a tool factory in Ashtabula, who had come home every evening with metal shavings in his cuffs, and who had understood that a wife who came home with sawdust in her hair and chalk on her hands was a wife whose work was structural, and whose opinion on whether a bridge was safe was not a suggestion but a fact. Walter had died in 2001. Lotta had continued alone. Lotta and Walter had had one son, a man named Dennis, who was Marn's father. Dennis had left Ashtabula County at 20, had moved to Cleveland, had worked as a plumber, had married a woman named Carol, who had managed a dry cleaner, and had divorced Carol when Marn was 7. Carol had raised Marn alone in a small apartment in Mentor on the dry cleaner salary. And the raising had been competent and tired, and had smelled of perchloroethylene, which is the smell of a dry cleaning chemical, and also the smell of a childhood that is adequate but not warm. Anne had been sent to Lotta's farmhouse every summer from the age of 5, June through August on the creek road outside Andover, walking the covered bridges with Lotta, standing on the timber decks, looking up at the trusses, learning the names of the parts. King post, top cord, bottom cord, diagonal brace, drift pin, bearing block. Lotta had not simplified the names for a child. She had used the correct terms from the first day because Lotta had believed that a child who learns the correct name for a thing learns to see the thing correctly, and a child who learns a simplified name learns to see a simplification. Lotta had taught Marn to tap timber at 6. She had taken Marn to the Benetka Covered Bridge, an 1890 Howe truss, 138 ft long, spanning the Ashtabula River, and had placed Marn's hand flat against a king post and said, "Hit it with the flat of your hand, not your fist, your palm. The palm has more surface area and produces a cleaner note." Marn had struck the timber. A sharp, clear note had come back, bright, resonant. "That's a sound timber," Lotta said. "Now come here." She walked Marn to a different post, a brace at the far end of the bridge. "Hit this one." Marn had struck it. The note was different, duller, softer, with a muffled quality that even a 6-year-old could distinguish from the first. "That one's failing," Lotta said. "The rot is inside. You can't see it from the outside, but you can hear it. The rot changes the density of the wood, and the density changes the note. A sound timber is a drum. A rotting timber is a pillow." By 8, Marn could tap a timber and tell Lotta whether it was sound, suspect, or failing. By 10, she could walk a truss and identify every member by name and function. By 12, Lotta had let her mark a failing timber with the chalk X, a diagonal brace on the Netcher Road bridge that had returned a dead thud when Marn tapped it. Lotta had verified the call, tapping the same timber herself, and said, "Good ear. That brace has been going soft for 2 years. I've been watching it. You caught it before I told you about it." Marn had felt, in that moment, the specific pride of a person who has identified a thing that is wrong before anyone else has seen it. The same pride a doctor feels when she hears the murmur no one else can hear. Lotta had also known about the bridge keeper's house. At the west end of the Allen Covered Bridge, an 1873 Howe truss over Mill Creek, stood a small clapboard house that had been the home and workshop of the bridge keeper, the county employee whose job had been to maintain the bridge on a daily basis, sweeping the deck, clearing debris from the abutments, replacing worn deck planks, and watching the water level during spring floods. The last bridge keeper had been a man named Virgil Hatch, who attended the Allen Bridge from 1932 until his retirement in 1971. 39 years of walking through the bridge every morning, checking every deck plank, every connection, every drift pin, and reporting his findings to the county inspector, who, in those years, had been Lotta. "Virgil Hatch was the best bridge keeper I ever worked with," Lotta told Marn once on a summer afternoon when they were inspecting the Allen Bridge, and Marn was 13. "He could tell me which deck plank was going to need replacing before I could see it. He walked the bridge so many times that his feet could feel the flex. A sound plank doesn't flex. A soft plank does. Virgil's feet knew the difference." Lotta had died when Marn was 18, a stroke at home on the farm on a Saturday morning in November, bridge inspection season, the fall inspection, the season when Lotta had walked the bridges for 31 years. She had been sitting at the kitchen table with a bridge log open in front of her, making notes for the Benetka Road inspection she was planning for Monday. The last entry in the log read, "Allen Bridge, fall inspection, deck planks 14 and 22 suspect, retap in spring." She had been holding her timber scribe, a small pointed tool used for marking timbers, in her right hand. Marn had taken the timber scribe, the chalk, and a framed photograph of Lotta standing inside the Benetka Road Bridge in 1985, her hand flat against a king post, the truss rising above her. After Lotta's death, Marn had moved back to Mentor with Carol and had finished high school. She had not gone to college. She had gotten a job at a lumberyard in Ashtabula, stacking and sorting dimensional lumber $12 an hour, because the work involved wood, and because a lumberyard was the closest thing to a bridge she could find in the job listings. She had rented a small apartment above a shoe repair shop in Ashtabula for $375 a month. The apartment had ended in the spring of Marn's 22nd year when the landlord's daughter had come home from Ohio State and needed the apartment. The landlord had been apologetic. Marn had understood. If you're enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep making stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, have you ever tapped something with the flat of your hand and heard, in the note it returned, whether it was whole or broken? She had $10 in her pocket and no car. She had Lotta's timber scribe in her coat pocket. She found the listing tacked to the bulletin board at the Ashtabula Public Library, a page from the County Gazette yellowed at the edges. Ashtabula County surplus frame house approx. 650 sq ft on 0.5 acre, adjacent to Allen covered bridge Mill Creek Road. Built 1873. Former use bridge keeper, asking $10. Contact county engineer. She walked to the county engineer's office in Jefferson the next morning. The clerk, a man in his 50s named Mr. Kovach, stamped the deed and handed Marn an iron key on a loop of wire. The Allen bridge keeper's house, Mr. Kovach said. Virgil Hatch's place. He brought that key to this office in 1971 and said, "Somebody who knows bridges will want this house. We've been holding it for 53 years. He paused. Your grandmother was the bridge inspector, I remember her. She walked in here every fall with the bridge log and told us which timbers to replace, and we replaced them. We didn't argue. Nobody argued with Lotta. She hitched a ride to Mill Creek Road that afternoon. The house stood at the west end of the Allen covered bridge exactly as she remembered from her summers with Lotta. A small clapboard house with a stone foundation, a chimney, and a door that faced the bridge. And at the back of the house, extending out over the creek on timber pilings, was the river room, a small enclosed room with a trapdoor floor, built directly over the water, designed so the bridge keeper could open the trapdoor and inspect the bridge's understructure without climbing down to the creek bed. She put the key in the lock. It turned. The main room was small, plank floor, plaster walls, a stone fireplace. A door at the back led to the river room. The river room was maybe 10 ft by 8, built on pilings over the creek with a wide plank floor and a trapdoor in the center about 3 ft square, hinged with an iron ring pull. She could hear the creek running beneath the floor. She pulled the trapdoor open. Beneath it, the creek was visible, 2 ft down, running clear over a gravel bottom. And bolted to the underside of the trapdoor in a waterproof metal box attached to the hinge frame above the waterline was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unbolted the box and opened it on the river room floor. Inside, a leather tool roll, a heavy canvas pouch, and a thick leather-bound book. The tool roll held a matched set of bridge keeper's hand tools, a hand-forged drawknife with ash handles for shaping replacement deck planks, a timber scribe identical to Lotta's for marking timbers, a set of 6 auger bits of graduating sizes for boring pinholes, 3 iron drift pins for securing timber joints, and a brass plumb bob on a chain for checking whether a post was true. Each tool was stamped VH, Virgil Hatch. The canvas pouch held gold coins, 35 Liberty Quarter Eagles dated between 1932 and 1970. The coin dealer in Ashtabula valued them at approximately $22,000. The book was a bridge log, page after page of hand-drawn structural diagrams of every covered bridge in Ashtabula County, each one showing the truss layout, the member locations, and 39 years of handwritten inspection notes in Virgil's careful pencil. Timber conditions, repair dates, replacement records, flood damage notes, load test results. Every bridge in the county documented by one man across 39 years of daily walking. The bridge log was a structural biography of every covered bridge in Ashtabula County. Tucked inside the front cover was a folded letter. To whoever opens this floor, my name is Virgil Hatch. I have tended the Allen Bridge and inspected the bridges of this county from 1932 until today, the 15th of November, 1971. I am 68 years old and I am retiring. I am leaving my tools and my savings and my bridge log in the river room because the river room is above the water and below the house, and what is stored between the water and the house will keep. The bridge log is the record of every bridge in this county for 39 years. The tools are what I used to maintain them. The gold is what I saved. Use it for the house, walk the bridge, check the timbers. Virgil Hatch, Bridge Keeper, November 15, 1971. Marin read the letter twice. Then she stepped through the trapdoor opening and lowered herself to the creek bank beneath the river room and walked under the Allen Bridge. The bridge's understructure rose above her. The massive king posts, the diagonal braces, the iron drift pins holding the joints, the bottom cords spanning the creek. And she reached up and placed her palm flat against the nearest king post and struck it. A sharp, clear note came back. Dense, resonant, the sound of a timber that was whole. She stood in the creek bed with her hand against the king post and did not cry and did not speak. She simply listening. D to the note fade, the way a person listens to a bell that has been struck once and is still ringing. She said quietly to the bridge in the creek and the timbers above her, "Thank you, Mr. Hatch, I will walk the bridge." The next morning, she hitched a ride to Ashtabula and deposited the coin dealer's check at the bank on Main Street. She opened a checking account and walked out into the November light. The following week, she bought a used truck, a 2000 Chevy S10 with 179,000 mi, and a cracked tail light from a retired farmer in Kingsville for $1,600. The first month was the river room floor. The wide plank floor had buckled from decades of moisture rising off the creek, and 3 of the planks had rotted through. Maren bought white oak planks from the lumberyard in Ashtabula. Her old employer gave her the employee discount even though she no longer worked there, and a man named Darrell, who had stacked lumber beside her for 2 years, helped her load the planks into the truck bed and said, "Lotta Aldrich's granddaughter fixing up the bridge keeper's house. Your grandmother inspected every bridge in this county for 31 years. She never missed one." Maren pulled the rotted planks and laid the new ones herself, cutting each plank to fit with Virgil's drawknife, boring the peg holes with his auger bits, and driving white oak pegs through the joints with a mallet, mortise, and tenon, the way Otto had built, the way Eric had taught Lotta, the way Lotta had taught Maren. No nails. The floor was level and tight and would hold. She made the house livable in pieces. She bought a folding army cot from the thrift store in Jefferson for $12 and set it against the south wall near the window that faced the covered bridge, so she could lie in dark and see the bridge's west portal, the dark opening in the side of the hill where the bridge began, framed by its massive timber beams, the creek running beneath it. She found a small cast iron box stove at an estate sale in Geneva for $30, and Mr. Kovach from the engineer's office drove out to Mill Creek Road one Saturday morning with a length of stovepipe his brother-in-law had salvaged from a barn demolition. Mr. Kovach helped Maren fit the pipe through a hole she chiseled in the plaster wall, and while they worked, he told her about the covered bridges, which ones were original, which ones had been rebuilt, which ones still had Virgil Hatch's deck planks. Virgil replaced every deck plank on the Allen Bridge in 1958, Mr. Kovach said. Those planks are 66 years old and they're still sound. He used white oak. White oak lasts. The first fire she lit in the box stove, dry oak splits from a deadfall behind the house, filled the room with a warmth that traveled across the plank floor and the plaster walls, and settled into the timbers of the house. And the warmth reached through the door into the river room, and the river room warmed, too, and the damp that had hung in the river room for 53 years began to lift. And Maren sat on the cot and watched the firelight play across the window, and listened to the creek running beneath the river room and the covered bridge creaking in the night wind and thought. Virgil heard these sounds every night for 39 years, the creek and the bridge speaking to each other in the dark. She set Lotta's photograph on the windowsill, Lotta inside the Bennetka Road Bridge in 1985, hand flat against the king post. She placed both timber scribes on the windowsill beside the photograph, Lotta's and Virgil's, the 2 pointed tools side by side. She hung the bridge log from an iron nail on the wall above the cot, open to Virgil's diagram of the Allen Bridge. Every timber numbered, every connection marked, every note from 39 years of daily walking written in careful pencil around the diagram like annotations on a map. A woman named Mrs. Novick, who farmed the land on the east side of the creek, heard from Mr. Kovach that a girl had moved into the bridge keeper's house and walked across the bridge one Sunday morning with a cardboard box, a coffee pot, 2 enamel mugs, a skillet, a sack of potatoes, a jar of pickled peppers, and a loaf of bread her daughter had baked that morning. Your grandmother told me in 1987 that the Allen Bridge was the best maintained covered bridge in Ohio, Mrs. Novick said. She said it was because Virgil Hatch had walked it every day for 39 years and had never let a soft plank stay in the deck. I believe your grandmother. She came back every Sunday after that. She always walked across the bridge to get there. She got a job in her second year. The Ashtabula County Historical Society hired her as a part-time covered bridge monitor and restoration assistant because the director, a man named Mr. Probanik, had heard from Mr. Kovach that a young woman at the Allen Bridge Keeper's house owned Virgil Hatch's original bridge log and could identify a failing timber by tapping it. Mr. Probanik had driven out to Mill Creek Road and had watched Maren walk the O. Lynn Bridge, tapping each timber with the flat of her palm, marking 2 suspect braces with chalk. And he had said, "Who taught you the tap test?" Maren said, "My grandmother." On a clear evening in late October of her 25th year, Maren sat on the stone step outside the house and watched the last copper light fade across Mill Creek. Covered Bridge stood beside her, the west portal dark and open, the massive timber frame visible inside, the king posts and diagonal braces rising from the deck to the roof peak. The creek ran clear beneath it, the water catching the last copper light. She could hear the bridge, not creaking, settling, the specific small sound a timber structure makes at the end of a warm day when the wood contracts with the cooling air and the joints adjust, and the whole structure shifts a fraction of an inch, and then is still. She thought about Virgil, who had walked through this bridge every morning for 39 years, and whose feet had known every soft plank before his eyes could see it. She thought about Lotta, who had tapped 94,000 timbers across 31 years and who had never missed a failing member. And she thought about Otto, who had come from Stuttgart with the knowledge that a wooden peg was stronger than a nail, and that a mortise and tenon joint tightened with age, and who had built barns that were still standing 100 years later, because Otto had understood that wood was not dead. Wood was sleeping, and a sleeping thing still moves. That's the thing about the timbers our grandmothers teach us to listen to. We do not always know when we are 6 years old and striking the flat of our hand against a king post on a covered bridge that the listening is itself the trade. We learn it slowly, summer by summer, timber by timber. And then, 4 years after the old woman dies, we open a trapdoor above a creek and find the tools of the man who walked the same bridge for 39 years, and we understand what she had been teaching us. She had been teaching us to hear the note. A sound timber is a drum. A failing timber is a pillow, and the trade is knowing the difference. Mary Ann Aldridge was 22 years old and kicked out. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on a crumbling, covered bridge keeper's house at the end of a bridge over a creek in Ashtabula County, Ohio. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you loved it, we have something special for you. 12 brand new stories, never released on YouTube, only available to the people who support this channel directly. Each one a full Quiet Road story just like this one. There's also a full audiobook available for the people who want to listen to all 12 in one place. You will find the link in the bio. We poured our whole hearts into these, and we made them for the people who truly listen. Thank you for being one of them. See you on the next Quiet Road.